Good evening, everybody. Glad you could join us this evening. We very much appreciate you taking time out of your evening to be here. And for those of you who do not know me, my name is Todd Jaeger. I am the superintendent of the district. It's my 8th year as superintendent, but I've been with the district for a total of 28 years. I started out in another district as general counsel for that district many years ago, about 33 years ago. And when I was in that job, one of the things I asked people in that district was, tell me what the best school district in town is in terms of academics, athletics, safety, and other factors. And overall, I generally got one response, and that was Amphitheater. And so all those years ago, I bought a house while I was still living in that other district. I bought a house in Amphitheater to ensure that my children would attend this district. So, and they did. All 3 of my children attended this district. They're all done now. The most recent of those, my son graduated from CDO just a couple of years ago. But I want you to know that I have reason, obviously, to share your concerns as a parent, but there's not a greater concern to me as superintendent, nor I think to any district staff member, than the safety of our students. And so it's important that we have this discussion and have an opportunity to kind of fill you in on the issues that we're dealing with, the concerns that we share with you, and the actions that we're taking to address all of that. I also think that one of the things I want everybody to understand is why we're doing this. It's a conversation that we should have in any number of situations, but most recently we were, like a great many other school districts all across this country, in fact, the victims of what was basically a large hoax that's been perpetrated across our local community, again, across the nation, and then even in our own district. It's been occurring, of course, through social media. And very recently, that hoax and the non-credible threat made by a student led to that student's arrest by law enforcement officials. So while we always hope that these things are in fact not credible, they are still always serious. And we take them seriously and will take them seriously, even to the extent of prosecuting students under the law for these types of threats. So that's what brought us here tonight. And I want to make clear that a couple things as I get started here. We had a great many questions that we received from all of you who signed up for this evening. And so I'm going to refer to notes from time to time. So I apologize for looking away from you now and then. I also have a couple staff members here in the room with me too, so that as we receive any live questions from you later on, if we have time, we'll try to answer those, and they'll be handing those to me as we get them, because I'm not able to kind of keep track of both speaking with you and watching the screen at the same time. So please understand that is the case. If we are not able to get to the questions that you might send to us this evening, then we're going to keep record of them and then hopefully answer them after the fact in writing. We are also going to be posting a record of a recording of tonight's meeting for those folks who maybe were not able to make it this evening or not able to sign up or what have you. So with that information, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. We're going to look at and talk about several things tonight, but here's kind of a rough look at what I'm going to be addressing. First, I just want to talk about our overall commitment to school safety and some of the things that we have had in place for a long time and probably always will. I also want to address how we handle threats specifically. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not going to be able to share with you lots of detail about that because some of that is, it's not classified, but some of it is security sensitive. And if we share things publicly, then it's not just the good guys who know things like that, but it's also the bad guys. And so we have an obligation to ensure that some of the information we hold close to our vest so that it works when we need it. Also want to talk just about the communication around school threats because we have a lot of questions about that, obviously. And what we can do as a community overall to make everyone feel safer, but also ensure the safety of our students, our staff in reality. I want you to know, again, first of all, that there is no greater responsibility that any school district probably feels, certainly in our own. And that's, you know, everybody that's a part of that district, I would say, whether that is our staff in the schools, our staff here at the district office, you parents out there, our broader community. There's nothing more important than the safety of our students in a school district. And so that's our top priority at all times. We make that our priority in many ways, in very concrete ways. Among the ways we do that is to, first of all, ensure that as a student starts with us at the beginning of every school year, we let them know our expectations for their behavior. We do that through our code of conduct, which we disseminate and distribute through our community. It's posted online. And every year we ask our parents to review that code of conduct with their children. We do some review at schools, but nothing is more important within a family than everyone in that family understanding the expectations for one another. And whether that's as a member of the family, a member of the community, or as a student, it's vitally important. And we rely upon our parents to ensure that you tell your children what your expectations are and refer to our code of conduct so that they understand what our expectations are as well. We also have a great many other, obviously, proactive measures in place to ensure that not only what our expectations are met, but also on the occasions where they're not met, where there is some kind of nefarious behavior by anyone, that we're ahead of it as much as we can be. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those things tonight, but they include such things as our regular and recurring safety drills of various kinds. We have a monthly fire drill, for example. We have lockdown drills, and we have secure in place drills, all of which helps us prepare our staff and our students for the obviously very rare, but just as terrifying nonetheless, scenarios that we're concerned about, like active shooters and the like. And so we have those things in place, but we do a lot of other things that I want you to kind of know about. We now have at all of our schools single access points. That is, everyone that comes to our schools, whether they be students or visitors, has to come through a singular point on that campus in order to enter the campus. That might be a gate from a student parking lot at a high school onto the school campus that is manned in the morning by school security officials or school administrators, and then is subsequently closed when school starts. After that, those students who come to school late, like any visitor who comes to school thereafter, has to come to our front office, that single point of access, and be buzzed in. You've probably seen these keypads and camera-equipped keypads at our sites. That's a fairly new access control and something that we have invested a significant amount of money in. One of the other things we've done at our sites, and it wasn't terribly popular at the time we first did it many years ago, but we have literally spent millions on securing our school campuses with appropriate and recommended fences. I will tell you that sometimes people say, well, fencing isn't all that impressive. Might be something that's to be expected, but the reality is that that was the #1 recommendation of both the Secret Service and the FBI some years ago, when they came out with recommendations for enhancing the safety of school campuses. And so that's one of the things that we put into effect immediately through our then existing bond program. All of our schools have now been secured with that fencing, and that in combination with our single access points is highly effective. The single access points were also a recommendation from a school safety expert who had a significant background in both law enforcement and the military, who advised us specifically that while our fencing was probably the best he'd seen in all of Pima County among all of our school districts here, that we needed to have these single points of access. And so we put that into effect almost immediately. It took a while to get it done because it required some modifications of our facilities, but it's done now. We're also planning to do more improvements at our facilities. When we have had some 90%, a history over a great many years now of some 90% of our funds for school improvements cut by the Arizona legislature, we haven't been able to do all the things we wanted to do. But fortunately, we've been able to rely upon local community support of our bonds. And we're going back to our community in November to seek bonds again that, among other things, will specifically fund security cameras throughout our schools and other security technologies that will aid in the physical you can expect to see. One of the other things that is essential for the safety of any large institution, large campuses like we have, is cooperation and coordination with law enforcement agencies. And we're really blessed in Amphitheater that the majority of our schools in our district, we have 21 schools and one special program, and the majority of those campuses are served by school resource officers. We overlap 3 different political jurisdictions. We go over unincorporated Pima County, the city of Tucson, and then the town of Oro Valley. The town of Oro Valley Police Department, as well as our Sheriff's Department, have blessed us with the presence of school resource officers on our campuses that are within their jurisdictions. Tucson Police Department does not currently have the resources to make that possible within the city, but we still have a tremendously beneficial and cooperative relationship with them and can rely upon them to respond to any need that we have in any crisis or emergency. And so we appreciate our relationship with all of those agencies. One of the other things that we, like any school district in this state, should have, and we do have, is that we have state required crisis or emergency plan protocols in place for each of our schools. Now, those plans are not published, and they're not published for a reason. State law actually exempts those documents from publication and public records laws because, as I mentioned before, if you publish something like that publicly, then it's both good guys and bad guys who can have access to it. So generally speaking, access to those documents, because they are safety sensitive, is limited to school and school district personnel as well as police personnel. In fact, we involve the police in the review and the finalization of those documents before they are finalized and have them sign off on them with their approval. So just want you to understand that there are some very specific protocols that are in place. Can't review all of those with you, but understand they're there. They are very detailed, and they range the gambit from things like bees in the neighborhood, chemical spills, to, of course, things as tragic and terrifying as a school shooting scenario or other weapon type of incidents. So now, if I can, I want to kind of move on to just giving you some information on when we get a threat. When we receive a threat, regardless of the source of that threat, how do we respond to it? And one of the things that some of you asked about is what we share about those threats with students. For the same reason that we don't publicize parts of our plans and our protocols, we also don't necessarily share all details of a threat with our students. Sometimes it's just not age appropriate, pardon me, to share those details, but often it's not appropriate because there is an investigation that's underway. We don't want to hinder or interfere with that ongoing investigation, but we share what we can. And we also do our very best to obviously train our staff so that they, best knowing their students, know what can and cannot be said to those students. In the event of an emergency, of course, we are going to rely upon the adults in a classroom, in a hallway, in a gymnasium, throughout a school facility. We're relying upon those grown-ups, those adults who are charged on a daily basis with the safety and security of those students. We rely upon them to ensure the implementation of the safety protocols. And so we keep them informed as we can on what is happening and what is necessary to make that assurance possible. So what happens when we do become aware of a possible threat? Well, the first thing we do, obviously, is we determine what we need to do in that moment, at that exact moment, in fact, to ensure the safety of children right then. Do we go into a secure mode, for example? Do we go into lockdown mode? Is it something as simple as a bee swarm across the street, a loose or stray dog that appears to potentially be rabid? Or is it something more concerning, like a bomb threat, in which case the evacuation of a school might be necessary, as opposed to the former two, which might mean keeping them in place? We then contact law enforcement. Once we've secured the situation and the safety of students, the next thing we're going to do is contact law enforcement to get them involved as quickly as possible, to gain their expertise and their advice and their participation in the solution and protection of students. We often work hand in hand, obviously, with our law enforcement community because they have specialized training and access to tools that we simply do not have. They can gain access to the identity of an account holder for social media account, for example, that we do not have the ability to gain. So all kinds of reasons why they need to be involved, obviously. And also they have other security and protective tools at their device, including weaponry and the like. We ask that our schools, after they've addressed those two priorities, we ask that our school personnel then let district administration know. Okay, we're not the first ones who need to know. The first folks who need to know are those folks who need to secure the safety of kids in a classroom or otherwise. Next folks to know, law enforcement, then district administration. We all already in this chain, whoever might be involved already, we then spend time accruing the information that we need to resolve the situation as quickly and safely as possible. That means that we're going to potentially need to talk to students or other witnesses or folks who might be involved to find out exactly what's happening. That might be something that our school officials are doing. That might be something that law enforcement are doing, or they might be doing it in combination with one another. When we've gathered the information we need to know what's happening and understand whether it is in fact credible or not, then relying upon the expertise of law enforcement, we are going to make that determination. Is this a real threat? Is it not? And then we proceed accordingly from there. The determination of whether something is credible or not is based obviously on a variety of factors. In an individual situation where perhaps it requires, for example, for that threat to be genuine or threat to be something that can be acted upon, it might be something like understanding whether or not the alleged perpetrator, the alleged person who is threatening a school has access to weapons or the other device that they might have cited as their mode of threat. That often requires law enforcement because, again, we might not have access to a home. We certainly can't go into a home, and law enforcement can in a number of different ways. We look for evidence of a student's plan. We look at things like the child's age. If we have a first grader, for example, who makes a threat because he didn't get to play ball with someone, that he's going to kill somebody, obviously we're going to take that into consideration and recognize that that little guy probably doesn't mean what he's talking about, but obviously we're going to have some discussion nonetheless. We also will take disciplinary action if it's warranted. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to the questions, because there were some questions about discipline, and understandably so. But in our school campuses and those on our campuses. And again, I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Ultimately, after these things are happening, we're going to make sure that whoever needs to know and whatever they need to know is disseminated, whether that's to our broader community, to you parents, to staff, to our students. We're going to share as much information as we can, as we should. Again, recognizing that the sharing of information prematurely sometimes provides people with false information, with misleading information. And we never want to be accused of misleading anybody about these very serious situations where we need to make sure, because people's fears are at stake after all, we need to make sure that we have found the truth and can share the truth with people. So just be aware of that. I want to talk, therefore, now about communication on threats more broadly. It's a very common question that people have, whether it was expressed in the questions you sent in or was expressed just more generally in communications throughout a school year, as is the case. How are parents generally notified about a threat? Well, if a possible threat is disrupting school, it is literally interfering with the progress of school in a given school day, or it's creating concern among students or parents, we are going to alert parents through typically a Parent Square text, notification, or email. And Parent Square is kind of new to our district in the last couple of years. If you have not signed up for your account, we want to make sure you've done so. Please work with your school to identify any information you need to do so. But that is our chief means of notifying you. And one of the advantages that Parent Square offers is that it can notify people in simultaneous and multiple ways. So that if you're not able to look at your phone, maybe you're at work, you've got your email on though, you can see it as an email instead of a text or what have you. So it is a very important tool for us to get you information not only about these emergencies, but also just general information as well. So please be sure that you have your Parent Square account activated and working. Sometimes we get a report though about something, maybe again, it's something like bees or a loose animal or just someone wandering around in the neighborhood that we're concerned about, not alarmed about, but just concerned about, need to be aware of. And so we might go into lockdown because we can't let the children outside with bees across the street, or the dog roaming the neighborhood, or the person that we can't identify but seems to be roaming around as well. And so we might lock down the school, but there is not an immediate risk of harm to anyone because we've done that. And so we don't necessarily send out an immediate notification that we're in lockdown mode. Sometimes lockdown mode is even just by a single classroom or so, because that's who's impacted by the location of that bee swarm or what have you. Or sometimes we can immediately identify that the threat, other than the bee type of thing or whatnot, that it's not credible. We can immediately identify that, and we come out of lockdown very quickly as a consequence. And so we generally are going to send out notification at a later time, because what we do not want to do is exacerbate the situation by accelerating the fear and worry that you may or may not have at that point. And so obviously we use our judgment there. And again, I hope everybody understands that when safety of children is our number one concern, we're going to make these decisions about whether notification is required or not in a sound and careful way. This is not something we take lightly, and so notification is not something we take lightly either. Sometimes our inability to inform you about things is because we simply don't have enough information to do so. And so we have to send you very vague and innocuous messages that frankly are just going to aggravate you. It would aggravate me. And so we hold off until we've got sufficient information that we can provide you with not only information about whether the threat might be credible or not, but that the information we provide you is itself credible. We also, as an organization that is working closely with the expertise of law enforcement, we are also going to take their lead sometimes in when and what information we can release. And so there will be times where law enforcement, as there have been times, where law enforcement will say, please do not release this yet. We're about to engage in an enforcement action. We're about to make an arrest in the neighborhood. We wanted to tell you so that you knew we were here nearby, but there's something happening in the house down the street. It's a domestic situation. It has nothing to do with the school, but we wanted you to be aware of it. We go into lockdown mode in situations like that all the time out of an abundance of caution, not because there's been any threat. In fact, police often say there's no risk to kids here. We just want you aware. And so we go into lockdown mode because we want to be sometimes overcautious. And I think rightly so. Perhaps it's not overcautious at all. And so we're going to go into lockdown mode. Maybe we're not alerting you immediately. Those are the reasons why we don't. In any scenario, again, please understand that our chief concern is always keeping students safe. And if anything we are doing would exacerbate the risk of safety to our students, we're not going to do it. If anything would neglect our obligation to provide for the safety of students or our staff, we're not going to do it. We're going to do those things which do ensure, in fact, safety at all times. We can't do this on our own, though. We are a school district community comprised of our students, our staff, our parents, our broader community, including our law enforcement agencies or other agencies that we rely upon to help meet the needs of our students and our community. So we need your support and your input and your participation as well. We've got to be a united front to ensure the safety of our students. The reality is that school districts and schools and the people who work in those schools, we only participate in a portion of a child's life. You participate and are part of and lead, in fact, much more of a child's life than we do. And so you share in the responsibility to ensure school safety. And there are different ways you can help us rise to the challenges that we all as a community face in this regard, because we all have a part to play. So there are things you can do that are as simple as just getting involved and being aware of what's happening in your neighborhood and what's happening in your school, so that you're able to perhaps better spot something that seems a little off in that neighborhood, that doesn't seem right given what you know about that school or its programs or what have you. Get involved in your site council. So many of our schools need greater participation in their site councils, or your PTOs. I have a group called the Superintendent's Community Council. And what I've asked is for two parent representatives from every school come to a meeting. It's about once a quarter. So it's not a lot of time, an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours in the evening after work, and provide input and guidance and advice to us about such things as school safety. Unfortunately, in recent months, last school year, we haven't had our first meeting yet, but last year, we only sometimes had 5 or 6 parents attend, whereas we should have been expecting about 44 parents to attend. So I have spaces on the community council still for this year, I know. And so if you're interested in participating on behalf of your school and your community, your children, then reach out to your school principal and let them know of your willingness to participate. We need you. One of the biggest things we all have a responsibility in is ensuring that rumors and the proliferation of non-credible threats do not accelerate. Please do not share or repost things that you see on social media. That's what happened in this situation. Someone posted something, and then someone else posted it, and then someone else posted it. And what happened is we had several instances, multiple instances of the same threat, alleged threat, being posted over and over and over again. If you have questions or you want to bring a threat to our attention, then bring it to our attention. Call your principal, call the police, make the report that way. And rather than posting it further online, which only broadens the fears that people have and almost unnecessarily does so every time. Similarly, our students, because of the nature of social media and the way they've grown up in and around it, they almost always are the ones who are reposting and furthering these threats simply by reposting them. So talk to your students about, look, if you see something online that concerns you, you should be telling me as your parent, as your guardian. You should be telling your school principal. You should be telling any trusted adult at your school so that they're aware of it. Simply reposting it on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or wherever it might be is not the way to help anybody resolve the situation. In fact, it exacerbates it and it complicates the investigation that the school needs to conduct. It complicates and broadens the investigation that law enforcement needs to conduct, because the time it takes them to sort through all of the repostings to find the original is exacerbated and lengthened and drawn out by every single repost that occurs. So we ask you to help us with that. Encourage your children to report things through appropriate channels. If they're afraid to do so, they're worried about, being accused of being a so-called snitch or anything like that, then they can use the anonymous tip line that we have posted on every single school webpage, main webpage. There's an anonymous line there that they can utilize to do so. Again, we hope that they would trust the school officials, their teachers enough that they could tell them directly, tell you directly, so that things happen as quickly as possible. I also would like just take a minute to recognize that we all have a responsibility as well to help our children stay out of trouble, to help our children do the right thing, to help our children understand our expectations for them, as well as the school's expectations, as I mentioned before, with respect to the code of conduct. And so that means we need to talk to our kids. We have to go to our kids sometimes and say, what have you been doing on Instagram? Let me see your phone. Some parents are hesitant to do that, but those parents might not be hesitant to say, who are your friends these days? Tell me about so-and-so. Social media has a great deal more impact in terms of the promptness of causing a situation to escalate than some of those long-term relationship building things. So it is important that we be aware of what our kids are doing online, and we have to remind them that online is forever. So please explain that to your students, communicate to them what your expectations are, what our expectations are again, and that you have standards for their behavior, as we do, that you will hold them accountable for, and that you want them to understand whether it's their behavior that's at issue or the behavior of one of their friends. You need to know about it. The reality is that the vast majority of actual threats to the safety of children in this country happens not at school. It happens actually outside of school somewhere, often in a trusted setting. Nonetheless, we have to, obviously, and that's why we're here, we're concerned about the threats that might arise in the school setting. But we also need to know when there's some threat perhaps outside of school. Maybe it's something that's happening in the mall on the weekends, or it might be happening just in the neighborhood between a couple of students who, when they're at home, have some kind of conflict. Because sometimes those conflicts or those incidents that are occurring on third-party facilities might spill over into our schools. And so we hope that you will reach out to us when you're concerned about something happening in your neighborhood, in the mall, wherever it might be, and you're concerned that it might have an impact on the school. Please let us know about that. Sometimes our students do a great job of doing just that. They report something to us that happened over the weekend. And we appreciate that so much, because often it does have the potential for spilling over into our schools or festering to a point where later it does. But if we can get ahead of that at the moment it's beginning, in those early stages, then hopefully we can avert all of that from happening. So please help us with that as well. All right, so one of the big questions we got in various ways was, how does the district handle discipline in situations where these threats occur? And it's an understandable question, because the reality is we don't tell you. And some people said, hey, point blank, am I going to know what happened to this student who I've heard about or read about being involved in this most recent situation? Will I know exactly what's happened? Unfortunately not. not as far as school discipline goes. And here's why. Both state and federal law prohibit school districts from releasing to people who are not the parent of or guardian of that student information about that student's discipline. Now, I know that sounds kind of, alarming and worrisome for people whose children might have even been involved, the victims of a situation. It doesn't make any difference whether you're a victim or whether you're a bystander or whether you've just heard about something. We cannot release to you information about the discipline of someone else's child. And understand that when it's your child, you probably don't want that information released to others as well, because it is private information. But here's what I can tell you. In Arizona, general information, obviously, in Arizona, we have a law that requires that if we find that a student has threatened the safety or security of a school campus or anyone on that school campus, we are required by Arizona law to expel that student for no less than 1 calendar year. And obviously, the law says it's no less than 1 calendar year. It can be longer. Again, I can't talk about any specific situation, certainly can't talk about, nor am I talking about the most recent situation or situations that have arisen. But I can tell you this, that because I will tell you that for almost 20 years, I was an expulsion hearing officer for this school district. And almost always, when a student threatened the safety or security of a school campus, and that, whether, I will even say this, whether that threat was credible or not, they put people in fear or apprehension of that threat, they almost always were expelled for not just a year, but actually on a permanent basis. Now, we do make exceptions, and the law says that we have to make exceptions as appropriate. Again, that first grader that I'll go back to makes a first grader threat to his buddy on the playground who didn't play with him that day. That student, that threat, not credible and not terribly impactful, because most of the time in those kind of situations, we all know it wasn't real and no one felt fear, or we were able to alleviate the fear very quickly, and it's not an ongoing thing. And so there are circumstances where that's the case. We also have students who, because of disability or mental disease, perhaps, when they say certain things, they don't mean them. They can't even comprehend what they're saying. They have no ability to act on them. And we may be precluded actually by state and federal law from taking long-term enforcement action. But what we can do is put appropriate controls in place for those students. And we do those kinds of things. So I want you to understand there are limits on what we're able to say and do and share with you. And so hopefully I've given you a little bit of general information that may assuage you of the natural fears you might otherwise have about our failure to share information with you. Now, a couple of other questions that came up, and they were great questions. Does every school have a law enforcement officer on campus? As I mentioned before, no. Sadly, no. A great many of our school district, our school campuses do. And as I mentioned, we're really grateful for situations where we have that in place. But we run the gambit of 3 different jurisdictions in all 110 square miles of our school district. And not all of those jurisdictions, as I mentioned, are able to do what some of them are. And so we still have a great relationship with all of our police agencies. They can come to help us when we need them, regardless of where we are. And we even have such a good relationship with some of our law enforcement agencies that they will even come to help us. They've promised to come help us even outside of their jurisdiction when we need them. So, so understand that. People asked also a lot about what do we tell students about individual situations? What do we tell them when we're having a drill? What do we tell them about safety in general? Well, even in the comments that we got from people, and even in the way questions were asked, we could see clearly that parents have differing opinions about what kids at maybe each grade level should hear or be taught. Some people have no objection to a little guy or little girl, a very tender age, being told point blank, this is a active shooter drill. Other people, just as understandable, have some concern about that, and obviously want their children protected from that kind of notion, because that kind of notion, as terrifying as it is and as real as we have to understand it to be, is a very rare occurrence, and it can unnecessarily alarm some students. So what we have to do in these situations is we have to trust our teachers and other educators and local school communities to know the needs of their children and best determine what can, what can't, what should, what shouldn't be shared in those circumstances. If you ever have a question about or an idea about what's being shared with your child or what should be shared with your child, we encourage you to talk to those people who interact with your child on a daily basis and let them know your expectations, understanding that they have to balance the expectations of a great many parents, of a great many children who attend their school, just as we all have to respect that balance. We also had some questions about mental health resources and what we have available in our school district. Reality is that school districts in Arizona are not mental health agencies. So we have limited resources in this respect. Only just yesterday, I think, a new report was released that once again indicated that Arizona is dead last in a number of things, including the provision of funding and programming like that in our country. Dead last, 51st. So we're not able to do as much as we would like, but we're able to do, and we do everything that we can. So some of our schools, because they're eligible for the same, receive grants that enable us to put an extra counselor in the facility or put a counselor at all, because not all schools can have counselors in place, or have a social worker. We have psychologists throughout our district that can support students when needed. But again, our psychologists are here for psychoeducational purposes. They're not generally here for treatment purposes. We have to rely upon professionals outside of our district for those types of things. But here's the thing we also have. We have relationships with agencies and professionals across our community, with mental health providers across our community that we can refer people to and help them find resources that enable them to access them if they're unable to do so on their own. We pursue those resources often on our own without being asked to do so, because we recognize a need. But if you see a need, again, understanding that we're only there for part of a child's life. If you see a need at home for your child, please trust that you can come to us in confidence, in privacy, tell us your concerns, and let us help you if we can. Find the resources, find the supports that you, your child, and your family might need, especially when a child's in crisis or may pose a risk of harm to themselves or others. We also do a lot of proactive stuff to help address the mental health needs of children, or perhaps more accurately, prevent lower level issues rising to the level of a mental health issue. So we have positive behavioral intervention supports and programming in our schools that are working to tremendous effect throughout our district right now. Every school some years ago, when we were in the throes of COVID, we recognized that traumatic event in the lives of our children, our staff, our broader community was pretty significant, and we needed to rise to the challenge of providing some remedial and immediate resources for students in this respect. So we've implemented social emotional learning programs in all of our schools. We implemented other opportunities at our high schools, for example, with advisory periods, which give students specific time to have access to their trusted adult teacher, so that they can go to them and seek help and let staff know when maybe they are struggling with any issue of any kind. That's intended to be preventative in nature. It's not reactive, it's preventative. But we do have reactive protocols as well. In coordination with our countywide law enforcement agencies, we have been participating in the development of and the implementation of a new threat assessment protocol called CSTAG, Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines. These are nationally validated through research and the like. We're very blessed to have been a part of their development and implementation here in Pima County. When we have a situation where a student has perhaps made a threat, or even suggest to us without an overt threat that they may be of risk to others, we can activate that process, involve law enforcement, involve psychologists, involve other trained professionals who can look at data, look at information we have about that situation, that student, and sort through it to determine whether or not, in fact, we do have a potential threat. And if we do, then to bring some of these resources to bear in our community, whether those are of a preventative or responsive or perhaps law enforcement nature. So I want you to know about that. Throughout our schools, we have, and part of our code of conduct focuses on our anti-bullying responsibilities. We all share in those responsibilities. I don't know if you've ever told your kids, as I told my kids, it is not okay with me that you ever harass or threaten another student, that you are ever mean to a fellow student. My expectation for you is that you are a friend to everyone. I always pointed out to them the tile murals on most of our schools, I think all of our schools now, that say "be kind." And I tell them that's not just a mural, it's not just a slogan, it's words you're supposed to live by here when you're at school, and frankly, in any part of your life. I set those expectations as a parent. We set those expectations as educators. And I hope that everyone plays a role again there. But we also need students to never be a simple bystander to any kind of bullying, because bullying is often a precursor to, as we know, something that leads to threats, whether that's threats coming from the victim who's been bullied for a while and is reacting to that in that way, or the bullier actually becoming the person who is exacerbating and accelerating their threatening behavior towards the victim. And so we ask that no student, and certainly no adult in our schools, stands by and watches that happen. We require every employee in our district to report any bullying that they see. We also require our administrators to investigate and conclude an investigation, hopefully, within 3 days of receiving such a threat, or such a report, rather, of bullying. And so our code of conduct booklet contains our bullying policy, and I encourage you to look at that and all of the other information that's in there, as I mentioned before. One of the other positive things we do is we have peer mentoring in place throughout our district. And there are some very specific programs that you might hear about at your child's school, like Link Crew, or something like that, where students play a very specific and active role in welcoming new students to their school and helping them learn the ropes, as it were, and kind of watching out for them, taking them under their wing and the like. But we also have a great many other things and opportunities for students to get mentored by their peers, whether that's just participation in student activities, where they get an opportunity to interact with upperclassmen at a high school, or it's the clubs and opportunities that are available at a middle or an elementary school, where they not only have the mentoring support of their peers, but also of a trusted club advisor and the like. So all of those kinds of things not only help us address concerns that might arise among students, but also give us an opportunity to help students bond with their school community and their peers and their trusted adults at that school, so that they never feel a need to either make a threat against that community, those peers, those staff members, or allow such a threat to go unreported. Just before we turn to any questions we might have received this evening, I just want to also just kind of make sure everyone understands that safety, school safety, safety anywhere is not a one and done kind of thing. It's not just about what a school does. It's not just about what a school district does. It's not just about what a family does to encourage safe behavior on the part of their children before they leave for school each day. It's not about any one thing or any one point in time. School safety is an ongoing thing and concern, and we therefore need to have ongoing actions and solutions and responses. And that's why everything we've done that I've already talked about might have evolved over time, continues to evolve over time, will evolve over time. Case in point, those security cameras that folks have asked for years, but we're talking about a proposition that takes millions of dollars to do. And we don't have those millions, not when our funds, those very funds, have been cut by 90% for many years. Those funds are coming back, but it takes more funds than what we get from the state. So we're turning to our voters again on November 5th to pursue funding for these things, as well as a great many others. We're constantly reviewing our protocols, our processes, our trends out there in society and social media, and we learn from our experiences. And we're not the only ones that are the teachers. We want you to teach us too. What are your concerns? What concerns have we risen to? What concerns have we fallen short of? We take this, again, so seriously. It's our number one thing. Kids can't learn without safe environments. So if your child isn't feeling safe at school, then we've got to encourage them to report that to us, and report it to us, please, on a timely basis. Their own crisis, in their own threatening behavior towards others. That's the first time we ever heard that child was bullied months earlier, maybe a year earlier, maybe in an entirely different school or school district. We need to know about those things so that we can better meet the needs of your child and ensure not only their safety and the safety of other kids, but just their success as a student. And so I'm going to ask you once again, be there as parents for us and help us do your part. Do your part in assuring the safety of our schools as we make that the #1 priority. And we ask you to join us in making it yours as well. Also, always remember that if you have any questions about anything, whether it's safety related or not, we have a really easy way for you to ask questions. And that's an email address, answers@amphi.com. We get a lot of questions there. We always respond to them. And so whether it's about school safety again, or it's about something else, please don't let your concerns or your doubt or your worry or just the question fester. We want to get you an answer, and we want to get any solution that's needed in place as quickly as possible. So help us do that. We don't begrudge anyone asking those questions. And to illustrate that right now, do we have any questions? Okay, question is asked, why is not every threat considered credible? Because they're not all credible. They're not all real. Again, it might be the expected and immature behavior of a first grader or a third grader, what have you, or it might be something that we investigate to determine whether it's credible or not, and we determine that it's not credible. If a student says, I'm bringing a bomb to school tomorrow, and we involve law enforcement and we investigate, we go to the parent, we go to the home, and we can clarify and know to a certainty. We look at, with the police, we look perhaps at online activity to see if the student has ever accessed anything like how to make a bomb. There are any number of steps that we might take to investigate whether a threat is credible or not. And isn't that what law enforcement does all the time? We have to do the same thing. We can't label everything as credible because it won't be. Some things are real, some things are not. And again, we work with experts to help us make those determinations. We look at a child's emotional and intellectual capacity, their developmental status, and we make these decisions based upon the information that we've gleaned. We don't do so willy-nilly. We do it carefully and appropriately. So I hope that is understood. Great question. This one do the schools practice with students what to do in the event of a school shooter? So we have, as I mentioned before, we have drills that we do on a regular basis. Those are required at every school. They're documented by every school. We show those to individuals like our fire marshal, to our police personnel. That's what our lockdowns are actually about. Our lockdowns are the way we respond to active shooter scenarios. But in the moment, as our staff is trained, in the moment, lockdown might not be the only thing we need to do. And so we communicate with our site, or would communicate with our site, because the reality is we've never had an active shooter here in our district, fortunately. But yes, we do communicate with students, and those teachers and other educators in the buildings, they lead the situations in the moment. But the practice that we do in these drills, whether they be fire drills or lockdown drills, are all about preparing for the unimaginable. Has each school identified an evacuation location? Yes, in fact, they've identified more than one because one evacuation location may not be appropriate in a given circumstance. Can that be shared? No. Because what happens if we have a bad guy out there who causes a threat to be proliferated in a school and encourages thereby the evacuation of a site to the evacuation location? If we tell everybody what that evacuation location is, that person could be waiting there. So no. Can it be shared? No, and it won't be. I know not everybody likes that, but again, our number one priority is the safety of kids, not getting people to like everything we do. What does a lockdown look like when it comes to a suspicious person? So as I was meant, if you're referring to my example from a moment ago, a suspicious person kind of roaming around the neighborhood, a lockdown is a lockdown. It's a very specific term of art. And basically it looks like all of the doors within the school being locked. Now, we already have gone to a status for our schools with a single point of access where our exterior doors are all supposed to be locked. And they do, they're generally always locked. And a lot of them have now been equipped with keypads that are activated only by staff who have a card and a key code that have to be used together in order to unlock that door and gain access to that building. But when we go into a lockdown, generally what that means is that every classroom door within a hallway, for example, is also locked. We generally encourage that our teachers keep their doors locked ahead of time. There is no reason why they can't be or need to be unlocked. And so you'll find that most classroom doors are locked as a matter of course anyway. Sometimes if a classroom door is used a lot, we put a device in the door that, while the door is locked, prevents the lock from engaging, but allows the teacher on a moment's notice, as soon as lockdown is activated, to pull that device from the door jamb and the door is immediately locked. So that's kind of what it looks like. All right. Will the bond include cameras on buses too? Actually, a great many of our buses are already equipped with cameras. We're buying them with cameras. From time to time, the cameras have issues like any computerized device. So you may or may not hear that, oh, the camera wasn't working that day, or there wasn't a camera. Largely, it's often that the camera wasn't working that day because of an electronics glitch. Technology is what technology is. And any new buses we buy with our bonds, we do buy with the cameras. Can we get detailed information on a threat so we can decide whether to send kids to school? I think, as I mentioned before, we're going to share as much information with you as we can. Sometimes we can't share all the details with you. And sometimes we're guided, again, by law enforcement as to what to share there. And sometimes what we would share would infringe upon, I know, again, it's hard for people to understand, but would infringe upon the federal and state guaranteed privacy rights of the student or students who are involved. And so we can't share too many details. Those are all factors that go into a determination of what to share with you. But understand this, we want you to feel safe about your kids, and we want to feel safe about your kids. Once again, don't ever think that we would ever knowingly ask you to put your children in harm's way. If you don't trust your school enough to have made a decision, then I want you to talk to your school principal right away so that you can better feel trust in our schools and in the determinations that we've made in a situation. But understand that may still mean that we can't share details with you in some circumstances. What cybersecurity measures are being taken to protect the district network, and student personal information. So we have a firewall, first of all, and we have a federal law in place that first of all, requires that we screen and protect our children from certain kinds of online information or behaviors. That's in your code of conduct. And again, it's one of the things I hope you will review with your students, because that is one of the most common violations of our student code of conduct, and that is accessing inappropriate, or trying to access, I should say, inappropriate materials through our district web, because they try to get into it and they can't. But what we get is a very specific report of exactly which student on which computer at what time was trying to access exactly what site or what they were searching for. That's again something that we hope parents will just simply say to their kid, it's not okay for you to do this at home, and it's certainly not okay for you to do this at school. So, another thing in that regard is that we are constantly, school districts all across the country are constantly under attack from would-be hackers. And we have a lot of safety protocols in place to keep them out. Just this past weekend, we received hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hacker attempts from Russia specifically. We know where they come from. We know what they're trying to get into. Invariably, we keep them out. But it's one of the things we struggle with. So thank you for that great question. With all school securities in place, why do some schools have gangs and guns? Well, I'm not aware in the last year of anyone having reported to us that there's an active gang at any school. Now, there are occasions where someone's going to be a member of a gang, and we might have to address that. There are occasions where someone might bring a gun to school, and we will address that. You can have all kinds of rules in our country. We have rules that prohibit people from bringing guns into airports. They still bring them into airports. We have laws that prohibit people from bringing them into any number of public places. They still bring them into those places. Reality is that you can have rules and people will violate those rules. Share one anecdote with you that still infuriates me to this day. After we put up a significant amount of fencing, as I've already alluded to, and spent millions of dollars on that fencing, we had a local news reporter who thought, well, gee, I wonder if you can still get over a fence. So he went to the back of a school campus and he put a ladder up against that school fence, and he climbed over the school fence using a ladder. And then he recorded himself doing it and put it on the news. As if anyone knows, you can't get over anything, including a fence or a wall or anything else, with a ladder. So why show people how to do it? Well, I called that gentleman and read him the riot act about that very thing and about why that was such an irresponsible thing for a member of the media to do. And he apologized profusely for doing so. Whether it's something like that or something as serious as a student bringing a gun to school, we're going to respond to it. Bringing a gun to school also requires the expulsion of a student for no less than 1 year, federal and state law, and we enforce that vigorously. Sometimes a student brings a gun to school accidentally. It's in the backpack. They were at a hunting event, or they were doing target practice with a parent who verifies that that was the case. Sorry, a gun at school, you got to know what's in your backpack. If you don't know whether you've got a bottle of booze, a gun, whatever's not supposed to be at school, you're responsible for it. Parents, we can help avoid these situations by simply looking in our kids' backpacks once in a while too. Because here's the thing, someone asked, one of the other questions we got previously was, why don't we search every kid's backpack? We're not allowed to. We're a public entity. We are the government. The Fourth Amendment restrictions about illegal searches and seizures apply to us. So we can't do the things that you can do as parents in your own home, in your own child's backpack, for example. Now, lockers, we own lockers. And we let our kids know that we can search lockers at any time. And we sometimes do so. There are things that we can do and things that, because we can do them, we do them. The things we cannot do, we're not going to be able to do.
Or over time.
Okay.
We can answer these in writing.
All right. Well, we're out of time. I want to respect everybody's presence here and willingness to participate for the period of time we scheduled. We do have perhaps some other questions that we weren't able to get to, but we will get to them. And we'll be sure that as we publish the recording of this, that we try to answer those questions and get those out there as well. Again, if you think of something after tonight, you didn't get it in the chat window or what have you, send it to answers@amphi.com by email. We'll do our very best to respond as quickly as possible. Once again, I just want to say that these are community concerns, and so they take community solutions. Schools alone are not responsible for the safety of our community or any part of our community, including our schools. We rely upon other parts of our community, whether that be law enforcement or our parents and our students themselves, to help us meet our obligations in this very important respect. So thank you for what you do in that regard, but also thank you for anything you will do perhaps further after tonight's discussion. My pleasure being with you. I appreciate the opportunity and the participation of a great many people. It was a great showing. Thank you. We're going to sign